Well, good morning and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you very much. I know a lot of you were registered for the May 8th event that we had originally scheduled that had to be postponed. But we're here today and we have a really great schedule for all of you. So thank you so much for your patience, and we're excited to be here with you all today. Um, we have a pretty full schedule for our member update today. So I'm going to try to limit my Rails news that I have to share with you today. But first, because I know a lot of you are very interested, we wanted to say a note about the statewide e-resource package. So the Illinois State Library has shared that a vendor was selected, and that vendor was EBSCO. They are beginning work on implementation, and you can expect to hear more from their teams as soon as they begin that process. A lot of you know that Rails has advocated for this package for a very long time, and we are so excited about the potential of this program. Unfortunately, that is all that we can say about it right now, but we will share more information as soon as we know it. We really appreciate you all being patient. If you have questions, Dan is going to share the Illinois State Library email address in the chat. They are the best contact to answer the questions that you have specifically about the program. But we look forward to learning more soon, and we know what a great value this will be for Illinois libraries all over the state. We are also expecting a formal announcement from the Secretary of State's office today regarding a grant process. We will be monitoring announcements throughout the course of this meeting, and if anything is announced while we're here with you all today, we will share more as soon as we can. So just a few other notes from Rails. We, as many of you know, just completed our Rails board election in late May. Thank you very much to everyone who voted. The results of that election will be available very soon. But in particular, I wanted to thank everyone who agreed to run as a candidate. We had a really incredible slate this year of wonderful candidates. It was the most candidates we have ever had for an election. That's really exciting, and I think very indicative of an engaged membership here at Rails. So having people who are willing to dedicate their time to Rails this way is very uplifting. I know as many of you who voted saw, people did videos this year and really said a lot about the reasons that they wanted to serve on the Rails board. And we're so grateful for everything that they put into that process. So I also wanted to thank our Rails nominating committee. Those folks recruited candidates, helped publicize the voting process, and made everything go really smoothly this year. So thanks to everybody for your help. On the legislative front, some of you may have seen the ILA alert late last week that mentioned the progress of the treasurer bond bill. So just as a reminder, that treasurer bond bill was a proposal about lowering a library treasurer bond from 50% of the operating budget to 10% of the total funds received by a library in the previous fiscal year. That bill was moved to the 1,300-page revenue omnibus amendment that was made at the end of last week. It was actually approved on Thursday at 4:30 a.m. For various reasons, leadership chose to package that into numerous other standalone concepts into that one amendment that was considered on the final night of this year's spring session. So that treasurer bond change for libraries has passed now both the House and Senate. We're just awaiting a signature from the governor that is expected to be signed into law by July 1st. That change will result in a really positive financial change for all Illinois public libraries, as well as the library systems. And we look forward to sharing more about how libraries can take advantage of those significant annual savings soon. Special thanks to ILA for their work on getting this over the finish line during the spring session. All other legislative priorities for ILA, as well as the Secretary's House Bill 4567 bill, that's the bill that was focused on threats to libraries, are currently on hold until the fall session, but we will be monitoring those closely as those move back into place, and we will tell you more as there are more developments. Finally, ILA's Public Policy Committee is interested in hearing ideas regarding potential legislation from ILA members. Proposals are due by August 1st, and you can find more at the ILA's website under advocacy. I'm also just going to put the link directly to the legislative proposal piece here in the chat so you can take a look at that as well. And finally, Rails has a new member engagement specialist in Jessica Silva. Jessica is already hitting the road and meeting a lot of our libraries. If you are interested in a site visit, maybe it's been a minute since the Rails library staff has come to visit your library, you have some things to show off, she would love to see you. We will put Jessica's email in the chat. You can reach out to her directly, and we would be happy to schedule a site visit at any time. Summer is a great time for us to travel, so she might be in and around your area soon, and we can get something going. So thanks so much to Jessica. We're really excited to have her on board, and we're excited for you guys to get to know her. So that is it for updates from Rails. But we are so thrilled to have Keith Hayes join us today. Keith is the ADA IT coordinator for the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Monica, for that introduction. So let me share my screen. So I've been invited to talk today a little bit about the new ADA Title II updates and what that means for libraries. And if you're feeling a little bit mystified and overwhelmed about what you're supposed to do regarding all this, you're not alone. This is affecting public entities across the US, and it's being likened to the original ADA as far as its impact. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of confusion around it. There's a lot of questions of how we're even going to accomplish this. So I'll try to cover the basics today. You should know this is a summary of a 300-page document. So if it seems like I'm covering things quickly or, and glossing over some information, I am. There's no way that can be covered quickly. So let's do this, shall we? So in a nutshell, Title II of the ADA now mandates web accessibility for state and local government entities. This is an expectation that all online content and mobile apps will be accessible by default. This covers also online services, programs, and activities. This rule has specific requirements now and technical standards. Those were not there before. Part of the rationale for the ADA or for the Department of Justice doing this was they realized more guidance was needed and more clarity on what entities should do in order to conform. The difficulty they had was that we haven't been doing a very good job in the area of digital accessibility. So the compliance date is an important question. It's one I get all the time, and it's when do we have to be compliant? Well, they've given 2 years for populations of 50,000 or more, and 3 years for entities serving populations of less than 50,000. That would be the compliance date would be April of 24th of 2026. And libraries should use the total population of their constituents served to determine their compliance date. So this is good news because it means that some libraries might actually qualify or fall under the 3-year compliance date, but double check because you might actually have to be compliant by 2026. Keep in mind, these new requirements do not supplant our existing Title II requirements. It's a new focus, but we still have to make sure our physical assets are accessible, etc. Readily and usably accessible is the term that they use over and over throughout the document. The idea is that we're lessening that disparity in educational economic attainment, and we're wanting to remove the need for persons with disabilities to have to ask for access to online program services and activities. And this is because accessibility is not accommodation. We have often conflated these, and there is a clear difference. Accessibility is just the how readily usable and how readily accessible it is for someone to be able to join a program, to use a service, etc. And accommodation is a one-off change for an individual's unique needs. And it's not a change to software. It's not a change to our services so much as it is a change to our policies and our operating environments to meet a person's needs. So we're targeting online content now. They state in the final rule, it's critical to ensure that individuals with disabilities can access important web content and mobile apps quickly, easily, independently, privately, and equally. And if you take nothing else away from today's presentation, remember this thing: quickly, easily, independently, privately, and equally. If your services and programs are not meeting that standard, It really doesn't matter how compliant you are. It really doesn't matter what you've done. You have not met the standard that is to be met. And what this means, though, also is the standard to be met is actually bigger than a technical standard. It's more than just meeting compliance. It's ensuring that we are truly inclusive. It's also important to note that web content is not confined to what's served by a web browser. It's digital content that's distributed in other ways. If you send a document out via email, if someone checks something out via Libby or Overdrive or something like that, that is a considered web content and mobile apps. So in general, this applies to anything that the entity, in your case, a library, makes available, provides directly through contractual licensing or other arrangements. So it doesn't matter if you purchased it, it matters that you're making it available. You must ensure the content is accessible on an ongoing basis. So it's not a do something once and then you're done. It's do something once and then monitor and maintain that accessibility. You can only use what are known as conforming alternate versions when the original cannot be made accessible due to technical or legal limitations. This is important because the technical limitation is that there is no technology that exists that could make it accessible. The legal limitation is not we purchased something and the vendor didn't make it accessible for us. It's that there is some legal reason why we can alter this document. Let's say it is documentation for compliance, for health, PHI, et cetera. You can't alter those. You have to talk to the state to have them fix those. That's a legal reason. Lack of how to do this is not a limitation, or knowing how to do this. So it's on all of us to learn. There is no differentiation between new content, that's anything we're adding after June of this year, when June 24th here in a few weeks, when the law takes effect, and pre-existing content that we've had in the past. If it's used to access programs, services, and activities, we have to make it accessible. We are responsible even if we're using third parties, software, third-party services, and third-party content. And electronic communication must be as effective for those with disabilities as it is for those without. So if you're sending an email to a patron to let them know about an overdue notice, that has to be accessible, that kind of thing. So let's talk about exceptions. I'm not going to go into these very deeply because they can take a lot of time. The exceptions are limited and specific. There are some specific conditions that have to be met in order for an exception to apply. These exceptions do not apply if your content is made available to apply for, gain access to, or participate in services, programs, and activities. So if you're using it for that, the exceptions don't apply. Archived content and digital collections for research are a little bit different, but in general, this is the way exceptions apply. If there is accepted content, you must make it accessible upon request and do so in a timely manner. Fundamental alteration and undue burden still applies. Fundamental alteration is where making something accessible would change the fundamental nature of that particular service or program or activity. Undue burden means it would be unduly costly or administratively burdensome to make it accessible. Now, these two things don't mean that we can just simply cite that and stop. We have to do everything in our power to make something accessible up to the triggering condition for that fundamental alteration, or up to the triggering condition for the undue burden. The 5 exceptions are archived web content, pre-existing documents, third-party content, documents for specific individuals, and pre-existing social media posts. Now, I know a few minutes ago I said we're responsible even if we're using third-party content. There are conditions around that with the way it applies. What they're intending is that we're not just pointing to third-party content in a way that's essential to use one of our services and not ensuring that content we're pointing to is accessible. It's different if, say, we're pointing to, say, websites in the county that are upcoming events and other things someone might be interested in. You have no control over those. You have no affiliation with the entities that you're linking to. That stuff you don't need to worry about the accessibility of. So for archive web content, the 4 requirements are: it had to be created for the compliance date. It has to be retained exclusively for reference, research, or record keeping. It must not be altered or updated after the date of archiving. And it must be stored in a dedicated area that is clearly identified as archived. And you need to, again, make these accessible upon request. It's not a bad idea to, on your archival section, put a notice that says documents in this section may not be accessible and will be made accessible upon request. Pre-existing documents have to have been created before the compliance date and not updated. Here is the list of documents that we have to pay attention to. It's exhaustive. PDFs, word processor file formats, so that's Word documents, I'm not sure, Google Docs, etc. Presentation file formats, that's PowerPoint, etc. And then spreadsheets, Excel. Again, if it's not on this list and wouldn't fall into those categories, you don't need to worry about them. Third-party content, if it's unaffiliated, if you didn't provide it due to contractual licensing, if you didn't post it originally, or it wasn't created for you. So, for example, if it's somebody posts a comment on your social media, you're not responsible for that. You're not affiliated with that person. If if you aren't the ones who made it available on your website, say you grabbed an excerpt from a document elsewhere and put it on your website, you don't have to worry about it. If you grab that excerpt, you have to make it accessible. Authoring tools and embedded content are things you have to make accessible. So, for example, if your website, you have a comment section on your website, there's an authoring tool that the authoring tool has to make those comments accessible. So for specific individuals, this matters. For things you're sending to patrons, it does not have to be accessible. If it's sent directly to them, it's secured somehow. Sending it through an email counts as that. Be aware if it's time sensitive, you should consider whether or not it should be accessible by default through the lens of effective communication. If you have bills, notices of fines, and that fine will go up after a certain amount of time, is it really effective if it's inaccessible to someone and then they have to come back and request it be made accessible and waste time, as it is for someone without the disability? If you get a request for accessibility of this type of documents, you have to ensure that that patron does not have to make additional requests. You need to take note, monitor, and ensure you're making things accessible for them by default. Social media posts, if you made it before the compliance date, that's June of this year, you don't have to worry about them. And that's because it's just too complicated to go back and fix them. Anything made in an ongoing manner, utilize all the accessibility features of that social media platform. If you're including images, have alt text for images, etc. If your social media platform does not allow for adding alt text to images or structuring your content accessibly, it's a good idea not to use it. Pick a different one. But I understand that if in your locale or particular social, and the Department of Justice understands, if in your locale a particular social media platform is really popular and important, then you may be stuck using it. Just be aware some patrons may not be able to make use of that information. Non-compliance, if it doesn't affect access, this is technical compliance on websites and such. If you have a small technical issue and it's not adversely affecting anyone, you don't have to worry about it. But consider it in terms of privacy, independence, etc. Specifics to libraries. There's not a lot, and that's because that they chose not to treat libraries specially in any way. So basically, if you're a library, they consider you the same as other public entities. Remember, some libraries count as small entities, so that would be the less than 50,000 total population served. Digital materials used to gain access to services, programs, activities must be accessible by default. And the Department of Justice expects collective pressure to be brought to bear to force publishers to make their content accessible. This is a difficult one, and I think we might see some counter lawsuits in the coming years because you really don't have control over your publishers, and they're very big. And even with our consortial pressure, we are not compared to them. That doesn't mean that we can not try. We have to try to get them to make things accessible. Know that the software used to search for materials must be accessible. That's also your account management software for paying fines, managing your library card, etc. Those also have to be accessible. Materials not in circulation count as pre-existing conventional documents or archived materials. So if you have, say you have digital archives that are relevant to your particular county, historical archives, things like that, those aren't in normal circulation. They're there for research, etc. Or you have just older collections of materials. Those don't have to be made accessible by default. You can make them accessible upon request. And if certain of these materials, it may not be possible to make them accessible. So you can use a conforming alternate version if you need to. And again, remember, fundamental alteration, undue burden applies. Use your best judgment. If there is a complaint, that rationale for your invoking undue burden of fundamental alteration will be examined by the court or the Office of Civil Rights, and they will make a determination of whether or not it was sufficient or not. If you can show that you were doing your best, if there's an Office of Civil Rights complaint, then the Office of Civil Rights, rather than requiring you to make sweeping fundamental changes, will likely help you with the areas you're making you've haven't met the standard they think you should meet. And so make sure you have a good policy, make sure you have good procedures, make sure you're following them and doing your best and can demonstrate that. And you'll probably be okay even if there's a complaint. You might even be okay if there's a lawsuit. I'm not your attorney. I'm not an attorney. I can't tell you you'll be fine. Consult your legal counsel on your operating procedures, and if they meet the risk and they are defensible. So here are some recommendations. One, if you don't have a digital inclusion coordinator or digital accessibility coordinator, etc., appoint one. You can hire a position if you can, or if you need to, add to existing duties, etc. But you need someone responsible for monitoring the accessibility and inclusion of your online services and your digital materials. If you don't have that, you're not going to be successful in making sure you maintain accessibility. It may even be prudent to create an inclusion team. Again, doesn't have to be new hires. They could be additional duties of individuals on staff. A team of about 4 to 5 people maximum, I think, will work for most libraries. They should have or gain functional awareness of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And then they should understand how common assistive technologies work with online and digital information. Understand the basics of what a screen reader does. Understand the basics of what text-to-speech software does. If you get those, then you'll have an understanding of what you need to pay attention to as far as making things accessible. You need to promote a culture of inclusion, proactively monitor the accessibility of services, gather feedback. And I have that twice because gathering feedback is important, and also I made a mistake, but I'm going to say it's so important I put it in here twice. What you learn may surprise you. You maybe think you're doing fine, and you may find out that someone has been struggling with a service that you didn't realize there was an issue with. You want to normalize accessibility. It's part of doing business. It's not a special consideration. Remember that access to digital information is a right, not an accommodation. And so we don't want to talk about disability and accessibility as an add-on, a special thing we're doing. It's simply part of what we're doing. So as part of that, in service to that, create a page on your website that notifies patrons of services and equipment available for use. If you have wheelchairs, if you have document scanners, there's a really cool pin that can read pages out loud. Things like that, that's good to add them, but make sure you're not doing it as, look at us, we're being so accessible. It's, here's part of the constellation of things your library offers. And you don't need a big budget to be inclusive and accessible. You just need to be aware of what you have to do and make sure someone's responsible for ensuring it happens. Make sure that there is a priority. Be careful of tucking it into someone else's portfolio. And the reason for that is because it may not get the attention it deserves and needs, especially at this juncture. If you do tuck it into existing portfolios, make sure it's consciously prioritized and that person has the bandwidth to pay attention to it. Make sure your websites and all your self-services, online self-services are accessible. This is your billing software. These are your checkout kiosks. There are others I'm sure I haven't thought of here, but that's just a few examples. One important point, do not use accessibility overlays to make your site accessible. Accessibility overlays are software that purport to take your website and add an accessibility panel and accessibility features. So a person could change the color contrast, invert the color contrast, increase text size, etc. At best, they don't help. Many of those things I just mentioned are what users with disabilities would do built into their operating system. They don't use extra software for that. At worst, they harm accessibility. These panels often are not accessible, say, to users who are blind. And when they try to make things accessible, they can't do it. It's not possible to determine all of the semantic information structure of a website automatically like that at this time and make it accessible. There are no shortcuts. Use of overlays have led to lawsuits. And what's telling in this is not only have they led the lawsuits, but the accessibility overlay companies are suing people who are speaking out and pointing out information about the problems with accessibility overlays. So they don't want people to know about the problems. They don't want people to talk about the lawsuits. That's very telling. So there's an overlay fact sheet that I've linked here, and these slides will be made available when I'm done. And then Lainey Feingold does an overlay legal update among with other accessibility updates. She's fantastic. Another thing I want to do is install screen readers and other assistive technologies on patron computers. Some of these are free, like NVDA. Some of them can be used for free for 40 minutes at a time. You have to reboot the computer afterwards, but there you go. That's like JAWS. There's Zoom Text and other things. Just learn what those are and install them so they're available to patrons. And just make sure patrons are aware on your website or at your circulation desk, hey, we have these available for use. For your digital collections, this is tricky. Again, you don't have much control. Talk to your vendors about the new regulations. Emphasize the expectation that your library must use only accessible materials. Add a requirement for accessibility into your licensing contracts. Leverage consortium pressure. The more that we put pressure, the more vendors will respond. Textbook companies are, for example, for higher ed, are already responding to some consortial pressure because it's become clear to them that all public entities in the US have to have these things accessible. Document what you've done to pressure publishers, document what you're trying to do. If there is ever a problem, that documentation will help support the claim that you're doing the best you can. And then ensure that software to check out and read digital materials is accessible. This is Libby, this is Overdrive, etc. And especially to screen reader and text-to-speech software. Those are the patrons that will be most adversely affected. The Department of Justice does recognize the need for training for libraries. Here are a few references. There's not a lot that I could find out there. Project Enable is a Syracuse University project. It's a little bit older now, but they have some good information there. The Big Ten Academic Alliance Library Accessibility Alliance is an excellent place to start. Deakin University offers online digital accessibility training. Unfortunately, they're not free. And the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, or IAAP, offers certification and training. They're not free either. But still, there's a few materials. That's really all I have to present to you. Here are some links, and let's get to your questions.
Thank you so much, Keith, for this valuable information. We really appreciate everything you've shared with us today. And as well as Dan mentioned in the chat, so many of the resources that you have shared with us have been included in the digital accessibility pulse page that Rails has created. There's a link to that page. And so a lot of the information that's being shared here is already there. But we will continue to add to that page with things like the information that's being shared here at the member update today, as well as any future pieces that we have to share. It's important to note that currently there is a memo from Ansel Glink that is around discrimination complaints. There's a link to the VPAT compilation from Rails and several other pieces of information. So we have a little bit of time for questions. I know there's a lot of questions that are in the Q&A right now, so we're going to do our best to get through some of them, and then we promise that we will continue to look at some of these things moving forward. But so, Keith, one of the first questions that's been asked by a couple of different folks is, does this include staff-facing materials as well as public-facing materials?
Yes, it does. There's a common misconception that the ADA Title II only applies to our customers. It actually applies to our staff as well. That being said, as far as your risk footprint, unless you know that you have staff that with disabilities who will be adversely affected by your any inaccessibility of your materials and services, start with your public facing things and then work on the interior facing stuff. However, be advised, don't ignore your employee facing services, because that can be a very difficult conversation when you go to hire someone and someone with disability comes to work for you. Because what are you going to say? It's like, oh, right, we haven't paid attention to this before now, sorry. And also it can unconsciously bias you against hiring someone with a disability.
Thank you,
Good
Keith.
question.
There are some questions about defining accessibility. Is there a definition that you recommend that we use as public entities?
Yes, actually, let me find it real quick. I'm going to point you to the definition used by the Illinois IT Accessibility Act. And actually, let me see. Let me do a couple of things here. There's the, boy, it's getting harder to find things on the web, you know?
I totally
So
understand.
there is a definition that talks about, really? Here we are. An individual disability is defined by the ADA as a person who has a mental or physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And here's the ADA's definition. I'll throw it into the hosts and panelists chat. And here's the link that I found that under. So basically, if you have a disability or impairment, have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or you have a history or record of such impairment, or you would be perceived by others as having such an impairment, then you're considered to have a disability by that definition. Now, the Illinois IT Accessibility Act let me find the definition here. All right, I'm just going to pull it from my policy because I know where that one is. So to be accessible, all right, okay. First, there's that. I broke that link, sorry. The IIT at the end shouldn't be there. Accessible means a person with disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective, equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. So that's taken from the IITAA, which is the Illinois IT Accessibility Act, which applies to government entities. So it also applies to you. And again, you have that equally independently definition. I'll need to update that now with matching what the four equally independently, privately, etc. So excellent questions, because we talk about this in general, but understanding what it really means can feel very squishy.
Absolutely. There was a question about what people can do to look and see how accessible their websites are currently. Specifically, it said long ago, there used to be websites that could run your URL against to flag potential issues. Do websites like that still exist? Are there places, resources that you recommend?
Yes, there are a few tools. I'll put them in chat. There is WebAIM's Wave. There is the Inspector WCAG for Firefox. I recommend that one as well. There is DQ Axe Core. No, it's Axe. I think it's Axe Dev Tools, I think they call it now. Those are all browser plugins. Those can all run your page. You might start with WebAIM Wave because that's also the one that the Office of Civil Rights is using. But they're not for the faint of heart. You're going to have to understand something about web accessibility in order to make sense of the information it's giving you. Oh, I remember the last one now, and this one's actually a pretty good one. This would be it's Andy. And it's a free plugin created by the Social Security Administration. And my browser just crashed. So there's the Andy accessibility tool. I'll add that there. And that was created by the Social Security Administration. That's going to give you information and talk to you a little bit about what you need to do to correct things. Thank you for Ryan for that, duplicating everything.
Thank you, Keith.
Mhm.
We have time for one more question on this section. I know that there's a lot, and so we'll see as we go through. Some of our other panelists may also be helpful in being able to answer some of these. One more question is, would cover images in our catalog and our email circulation notices have to be described? So would they need a level of description?
It's going to depend on if you consider that cover image essential for the context of the message. If it is merely for look and feel, the answer is no. That counts as a decorative image, but you'll need to make sure you mark it as decorative. So say if you're using Outlook, you can just right click on the image and click mark as decorative in the alternative description. Many popular tools for mail circulation allow that now. But what happens if you don't describe it and your tool you're using doesn't allow you to mark it as decorative? It'll just simply be announced as image, which can make a person wonder what they're missing, and they will then not trust the entire rest of your message. If you have a problem, try putting in try double single quotes in where you put your textual description, and that might make it disappear. The goal was that if it's decorative, you don't want it to be in the way of the primary information. And so mark it so the assistive technologies don't even announce the presence of the image.
Keith, thank you so much for this
Of
information
course.
today. I know we still have a lot of questions that are in the chat. The other piece is that all the resources that have been recommended and shared here in the comments, we will make sure that those are also included on the Pulse page for digital accessibility, so you won't lose track of those and can come back and take a look at them. So thank you so much, and we really do appreciate that.
Of
Um,
course.
uh, Keith, beyond Keith, we have some other folks here today that we want to make sure you get a chance to hear from. One person who we just promoted to panelist, and Jennifer, I have to ask you just if you can be brief as we go through some of these things, offered to speak a little bit about her experience. And I'm so grateful for that, Jennifer. We have learned so much throughout this process because of what you have been willing to share about your experience with dealing with accessibility complaints. So thank you so much for offering to share with the group today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my, what I shared with you and doing this to share with everybody, because that's my hope that what our library's undergone can help others. So our library is Antioch. We're at the beginning of the alphabet, and a complaint was filed against our library with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights about our web accessibility. And If your library receives a complaint like this, a couple things to know: it comes as an email. It looks a little suspect. It was addressed to Dear Superintendent Drinka. It had a very strange name for the attachment that had the complaint letter. So if you receive something like this, all I can tell you is to take it seriously, reach out to your attorney, let your board know, bring your staff on board, and don't be ashamed. My library was one of, I think it's 5 or 6 libraries that was explicitly listed because we're at the top of the alphabet. But the complaint itself is against all libraries in the state of Illinois, basically that use Overdrive. That was kind of the in. There's a particular person who is filing a lot of complaints across the country. The Office for Civil Rights said they're dealing with about 5,000 similar complaints in the same posture. The thing to know is that once the Office for Civil Rights reaches out to you, they're going to share with you a resolution that is hoping that you can come to a mutually satisfactory, into compliance digitally within 6 months. And they want you to sign this document within 30 days. And once you sign that, then you're saying that you're going to work with them to come into full compliance within 6 months. We worked with our attorney to get them to add some wording to clarify the 6 months date is not the end all be all date, that it's meant to be a working together. The cool thing is once you do sign this resolution, you have the full weight of the Office for Civil Rights behind you. And now they're working with you to directly work with vendors to bring them into compliance. And so, yeah, so I've shared information that I can on the Rails library, directors listserv. I've shared it with Rails, the state library, ILA. I have made Brad Schneider, our federal, our US congressman, aware of what's going on. We can't disagree with how important this is, that we want to make our virtual presence just as accessible and welcoming as our physical. It's just the approach was a little alarming. So the main thing I understand is we have this timeline, like Keith was saying, to come into compliance unless a complaint is filed against you. So.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we're
Thank
going to
you.
hold you as a panelist just in case there's anything that might
Sure.
come in that direction, but we really appreciate you speaking about this and sharing with the group. Next, as a speaker, we do have Sonya Schryer Norris. Sonya is actually presenting a full webinar for us this week, but we thought given our topic that it might be a good idea for us to have her come today and preview a little bit about what she's going to be talking about. Hopefully you can attend her June 12th event, which is also linked on that Pulse page for digital accessibility. Sonya, welcome.
Hello to everyone. My name is Sonya Schryer Norris, and I am coming to you today from Lansing, Michigan. Thank you so much for having me today to talk to you about web accessibility. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I'm always glad to have the opportunity to share what I've learned. And as Monica said, I'll be giving a highly interactive full-length presentation on the modern e-accessibility landscape for Rails on Wednesday, June 12th at 10 a.m. Central Time. So I've worked in e-accessibility since 1999, when I ran an intranet for 9 network Braille and Talking Book libraries, and we did have screen reader users on staff at multiple locations. I went on to teach e-accessibility to over 300 library staff in person over a period of 10 years. And then I began teaching these skills online in all 50 states and internationally. My trial by fire was I led the Library of Michigan web team through a 2-year remediation process. We were the first agency department to be tagged by the Department of Justice Civil Rights complaint. We were the original complaint by the prolific advocate. And so it was a 2-year process, and we learned a lot. And I then began consulting with public libraries on other e-accessibility complaints through the Office of Civil Rights. So what's the best scenario for receiving a complaint? Maybe a dad is at the park with his kids and it's going to rain. And he's like, okay, I got to get the kids indoors. Let's see what's happening at the library. And he gets on the website and the calendar is completely unreadable. And so he files a complaint. That's a great scenario. It came directly from a patron who was trying to use your services. It is not as great a scenario to think about a complaint coming from someone who doesn't use your library, may not reside in your city or state, and may not have chosen your library for any particular reason to file a complaint against. So there are very few websites in the US that can get a clear accessibility report. Keith was talking about WebAIM, Wave, and these other services, and they are fantastic, but almost no one, less than 4% of US websites will have a completely clean accessibility error report. So let's look for a moment at what this complaint process through the Office of Civil Rights looks like. Filing an accessibility complaint against a library or any other public agency is done at ada.gov. And right there in the menu structure, you can simply file a complaint. The complaint can be based on discrimination that the advocate was personally affected by, or an advocate can fill out this complaint for a person known to them or persons unknown to them. This document is key. It is a 27-page report from the Department of Education, Office of the Inspector General, on exactly how complaints are handled by the Office of Civil Rights. So this is their report on how it's working. Every part of the process is covered, including what is required of the complainant, what is required to begin an investigation, and what the Office of Civil Rights requires of schools and libraries they are investigating during the process, and the timeline of the process. And I'll be talking more in depth about these processes on June 12th. The advocate who has filed so many complaints is still prolific, and you can check her out on Facebook. And she posts communication that has been sent to her from the Office of Civil Rights. So if you're looking for more documentation, what do the advocates receive when they file a complaint, whether it's accepted or rejected for investigation, those letters are on her Facebook page and on her website. So this complaint process is still in effect. There's no indication that it will be discontinued before or after the Title II changes go into effect. So let's talk about how to make your library a harder target. The Office of Civil Rights takes into account whether the library is already working toward accessibility. So here are ways to address the number 1 and the number 2 most frequently cited problems: alternative text, which describes images for screen readers, and having an accessibility policy on your website. So these are the 2 things to do right now if you're concerned about your vulnerability to a complaint. Once again, have an accessibility policy on your website, and I'll talk more about what needs to be in it next Wednesday. And the second thing is having alternative text for each image on your site that you haven't marked decorative. Let's talk for just a second about how important alternative text is, because it's not only a number 1 issue because it's important to people who are using screen readers, but it is what I call a sunshine skill, because it helps the people who are learning it become more adept, not only at creating accessible content, but also at using accessibility in their personal lives. I always teach alternative text in the realm of social media, and learners with a good attitude about accessibility, which is many, many, many people in the library profession, according to a survey that I ran, and they feel good about themselves when they can master this skill. And part of that is because they can practice it on their own, in their own world, in their own social media. And they know a secret that's making their content better and more available. So alt text really is a sunshine skill. This one is not a burden to learn or to incorporate. You can learn more about writing alternative text and 2 more foundational eAccessibility skills, linking practices and heading structure, for free at my.nicheacademy.com/Sonya. That is my own account. I created these courses when I was still working for the Library of Michigan. They are still available. And once again, you can reach them at no charge at my.nicheacademy.com/Sonya. So there are key eAccessibility supports in libraries. So supports for staff include training that provides relatable skills. And of course, managers and directors are going to have other needs, including support from the greater institution, most specifically writing accessibility into procurement and contracting language. And you can also evaluate your own library on these key eAccessibility success indicators. Either at the presentation next week, we're going to go through them and you'll have an opportunity to reflect and then see the answers of other people and those other 627 public libraries that responded. And you can also just take it at my.nicheacademy.com/Sonya. So in 2020 to 2022, I conducted a survey of public libraries on eAccessibility success indicators. And I developed that poll after working through the 2-year remediation process to get the Library of Michigan to a clean error report. And we figured out a lot about what's required to maintain eAccessibility. So if you're interested in looking more at the survey data, I published an article with Jared Oates, COO of Niche Academy, in Computers in Libraries last fall in November. We are really in a good position as a profession to move into accessible websites. Strong positive attitude, strong commitment to the public. It's just a matter of learning skills at this point. With a basic understanding of how the Office of Civil Rights handles accessibility complaints, the ability to compare yourself to other public libraries on success indicators, and learning what's meaningful to actual screen reader users, we can leverage this knowledge as a community, get a handle on having an accessible digital footprint, and the tools we need to live our values as institutions serving the entire community. We truly do have this. It is not as hard as the intimidation can feel when you're talking to the Office of Civil Rights. So it's okay to say I felt really good about the decision to become accessible, but now it's tedious. I don't see the impact of my work. I thought it would get easy, and I'm disappointed that it still requires so much effort. I rarely get thanked. It would be nice to get a thank you. And I want to make sure that my volume is on here. One moment. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I want you to see this and I need to share it with the volume. Okay, let's get you that thank you.
I wanted to take a moment and say thank you.
Very sad. It doesn't feel like streaming. Well, I will tell you, it was a very nice thank you from 3 different screen reader users showing their appreciation.
I wanted to take a moment
that you've learned these skills and that it matters to them and it makes a difference in their lives that they can access material on the web. So thank you. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out anytime. My email is librarian@sonyanorris.com and my website is plumlibrarian.com. Once again, that link to my Niche Academy teaching those key eAccessibility skills, including alternative text, can be taken for free at my.nicheacademy.com/Sonya. Thank you.
Sonya, that was wonderful. And I so appreciate your framing of this as something that we as an industry are well positioned to do, and that it really does make things better for everybody who's trying to use it. So I know you want to hear more from Sonya. Please go and see her full length webinar on June 12th so you can get more information and ask questions there. We so appreciate all of our speakers sharing information about digital accessibility today, and know that this is a huge priority for Rails under our strategic plan, as well as just because our members know that it's so important. So thank you all. I do want to move us to our next topic. I know we may go a little over an hour today, but I hope if some of you can hang with us, that you can go ahead and do so. But some of you may have heard of the My Library Is campaign. It's Rails efforts to help libraries to tell their stories. And this year we gave out more than $100,000 in grant funding to all types of libraries. But we wanted to hear from last year's recipients who just finished their grant projects. Last year, the program was specific to school libraries. So each of them comes from a school library today. First, we have Aimee Miller from Batavia High School in Batavia, Illinois. Welcome, Aimee.
Hi, I know we're getting near the end of the meeting, so I will make this quick, but I want to say thank you so much for the grant. We really appreciate it. This is I think maybe the second or third grant we've received, and it has really enhanced the library. So I was gonna share, let's see. I was gonna share my, let's see, screens. Share. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, shoot. Nope, I don't want that. Ugh. You know what? It's okay. I was gonna share a little presentation I made, but I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Aimee, I've got it up if you want me to share it from my side.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing, that would be great.
Okay. Do you want to just stop sharing and I'll share mine?
Yes, but okay, stop share. Okay. Yep. While he's sharing, I'll just tell you real quickly, we when I was doing a large weeding project, I was going through my cookbooks, which were just terrible. And I had a student asking for a cookbook. And so that's kind of where the idea of this grant came from. We called it My Library is Cooking. And you can just flip through it, Dan. And so I just wrote a small grant to get some new cookbooks, which I wasn't sure exactly where this was going to take us. But sometimes grants I think for things you really need. And this was more of a grant that I just thought it would be something really nice to have. And it's really taken off. Dan, can I flip through it, or you need to flip through it, right?
I think it's me.
You keep going. Keep going.
Just tell me when to stop.
Sure. So again, my inspiration was our cookbooks were horribly outdated, like bad pictures from the 70s. So I just really wanted to do a whole new cookbook section. You can keep flipping. Couple things I considered, how many students would use this, and I really tried to think about what other clubs and organizations could get on board with this. And I've had food classes, our cooking club, my book club has used them, our international club, and I've publicized it through our library newsletter and social media, and we've done a lot of programming with them. You can go ahead and flip it. Since I was able to get this generous grant, I'll be able to continue this in the future, because now I only need to purchase a few cookbooks at a time now that I have this great collection going. The project has been really successful, and I have moved the cookbooks to their own section up front, and they get lots and lots of traffic. And students did help me pick the cookbooks as well. So if you flip to the next one, I think there's some pictures of them. So we got some cookbooks with famous chefs. Some of our pop culture ones have been really popular. We have a Dungeons and Dragons cookbook. We have a Doctor Who cookbook. I tried to get all sorts of different ethnic cuisines, which has been very popular, which has been fun. And I go ahead and we'll flip to the last one. Oh, well, we also got some beginners cookbooks and for kids going off to college. And then I just have a very small display right at the front of the library that we're going to leave up.
I think we might have lost Aimee.
Oh, no. Well, hopefully we'll get Aimee back, but thank you, Aimee, so much for presenting on some of these things. We know that this grant was really valuable to your users, and we really appreciate so much the work that you did to make this happen for them. Next, I want to welcome Sheila McNair from Trinity High School in River Forest, Illinois. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you. I am just want to talk a couple of minutes about the grant that we received. We called it My Library is a place to find my BFF, which is something I made up. It's books for fun. So the concept isn't the most novel, no pun intended, but I just was so desperate for a fiction and nonfiction, like books of interest refresh. So I did some investigation into the collection. I'm kind of new here. And I found that the average age of a title in our collection was published year of 1998. Average fiction titles were 2006 and nonfiction titles were 1991. So with that age issue, you know, I was just trying to think of how that played into like the explosion we've had in diversification of our literature for teens. Oh, sorry, I work in an all-girls Catholic high school. And our student population is really unique. It's like super diverse. And we don't, obviously, with books published in 2006, we weren't serving them well in that regard. And so just to like kind of get proof of my hunch that people didn't want me in this, I did a survey, and first of all, as far as our demographics go, 60% of our students identify as non-white. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were getting really good stuff. And so, but I did do a poll to see what the kids were saying. And here, I just wanted to highlight a couple things they said. I feel as though the collection of books in Trinity's libraries do not allow me to relate to the writing since they weren't written recently. It does have a lot of books, but I feel that most of them are for school and not something anyone would enjoy. That was kind of like there's hardly any, this one was profound, I thought. There are hardly any books about disabled teen girls, which is why I also want to write and draw a graphic novel series about one. We deserve recognition too. And the last one was, I just personally prefer the selection of books at my local public library because it's more up to date with the popular books. And I, as a former public youth services librarian for 15 years, I appreciated that. But also the key for us was that our unique population, our students come from over for dozens, like 50 zip codes, and they bus in from all over the city and suburbs. And so when I think about accessibility and who has access to what, I just thought, you know, we should be a place where somebody could run in and get a fiction title that is interesting to them, that was written within the past couple of years and that features diverse characters and their experiences. So we got that grant, and it was just kind of a random card I put together of about 80 books with totaling about $1,800. And what I used to decide what to purchase was that it had to be published in the last 5 years, and some of the combination of 3 or more favorable reviews from places, things like the Alex Award, Stonewall, Yalsa, Prince, Kirkus, like Kirkus starred reviews, and then School Library Journal starred reviews. And so what the outcomes have been, it's been amazing. Our circulation has gone up 60%. There's a lot of possibilities that I haven't even begun to scratch the surface with, just because just me in here. But for partnership with clubs. And so like our Diversity in Action Club, we'll have our AAPI, did a little shout out about the new collection on their announcements in May. So stuff like that, there's just endless possibilities. And most importantly, the whole goal was to get kids to read for fun, their books for fun. And so that I got the English department on board. And so everyone's reading 20 minutes a day for fun, pleasure reading. And now we have this beautiful collection that they can come and choose from, which was the key. So we're so grateful. This was just totally transformative of the whole space. And we're really grateful.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Sheila, and to Aimee. And thank you to all of our grant recipients for the great work that you're doing, and congratulations on your projects. Well, now we do have some time for some library news. If you want to share something that is going on in your library, you can go ahead and enter it in the chat so that we can share with the rest of us about things that are happening. You can also see more about the Rails My Library Is grant program in the chat. Dan went ahead and put the chat there so you can see more about some of the other projects that have been shared. And Sonya has also shared the Office of Civil Rights report on processing web accessibility complaints in the chat as well. Thank you, Sonya. Well, if there is no library news to share, I just want to, I just saw a little bit. Laura said my library finally has its own Friends of the Library group. Congratulations, Laura. That's great news. And I know it takes a lot of work to get that moving forward. We are so happy that all of you took the time to join us today. Please note that our next Rails member update is on Wednesday, September 4th from 3 to 4 p.m. We will post a link to that registration page in the chat so that you can see that. And while we're doing that, I'll just also note that Christy mentioned that the Creston Dement Library has broken ground in February, and they should be having a new building by April of next year. Congratulations, Christy. Fantastic news. You know where to share your news with us. We really appreciate the chance to talk with you today. But until then, we will see you at the next September meeting or before. Have a great day, everybody.